Milling Through History presents the original Inauguration Day. On January the 20th, every 4 years, people across the country will turn on their TVs, or if they really are brave enough to stand out in the freezing cold, witness an event which has been occurring since 1789, and that is the inauguration of the President of the United States. Now, Inauguration Day is a rather unique one, and it is an event that, while some folks might take it for granted, others take it quite seriously. But January 20th was not the original Inauguration Day. Rather, there was a different day that was specifically selected in the Constitution to be the day in which the President of the United States takes over the job. That day was March the 4th. Now, what is rather unique to note is that Inauguration Day was set up in the Constitution as an amendment, namely the 12th Amendment. And so this was seen as a way to specifically have the House of Representatives declare that if we cannot see a clear-cut winner in the presidential election, this is the day we decide who will become President of the United States. And thus, the President is inaugurated. So it simply becomes the House would vote in the morning, the President is sworn in the afternoon, and we all move forward with our lives. Well, with the passing of the 20th Amendment, the time period between a federal election and the inauguration was decreased. Now, you might ask yourself, why was it so long to begin with if the first Tuesday of November is the election day and March 4th was the inauguration day? In the 18th and early 19th century, the primary reason for this was because presidential candidates could be coming from a far ways away. Imagine, if you would, living all the way in western Tennessee. You get yourself elected president, you're going to need time to get from western Tennessee all the way to Washington, D.C. And so the 4 to 5 month period that you had was certainly more than enough to cover the distance. But as transportation improved, distances became shorter, and therefore the time needed for a president-elect to go from election day to inauguration day also needed to be shortened. But from the years 1793 to 1933, March 4th had always been the official inauguration day. And what makes this particular day so unique is that March 4th set into place all of the traditions, or at least the vast majority of them, that we have today. For instance, aside from Washington's inauguration, which was held in New York City, and the first term for John Adams, Washington, D.C. has always been the location for Inauguration Day. In addition to this, it has always been an outdoor event, with only one exception, and that was for William Howard Taft, whose inauguration had to be moved indoors for the main reason there was a blizzard. But there are rather notable facts which are attached to March 4th, because there are some things in history which are seemingly just unbelievable. For instance, on March the 4th, 1849, there were claims that David Rice Atchison briefly became the President of the United States for one day. The reason for this is because there was a deep concern that Zachary Taylor, who had spent most of the time of his president-elect run being in California, would not make it into Washington, D.C. on time to become president. Well, thankfully he did, but the rumors circulated that Atchison was technically the President of the United States. Even his tombstone says he was President of the United States. But historians debate the legitimacy behind this and think it may have just been an urban legend that took on a life of its own. On March the 3rd, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes found himself having dinner with President Grant. And in a rather unique moment, he was asked to stand up. And going into another room with Grant, there was a judge ready to swear Hayes into office as President of the United States. The reason being is that Inauguration Day was falling on a Sunday, and he would have to be inaugurated the next day. And so, in a most technical of manners, for just a brief period of time, our nation had two presidents at the same time. Now, not every president necessarily decides they want to show up for their own, for the inauguration of their own opponents. In fact, the very first president to say, "I'm not going to show," was John Adams in 1801, who didn't want to see Thomas Jefferson take over the office he had so hard worked for. Proving that the acorn does not fall far from the tree, John Quincy Adams also in 1829 opted to get out of town in order not to see Andrew Jackson be sworn into the presidency. Martin Van Buren in 1841 also was not there for the inauguration of William Henry Harrison, but nobody is 100% sure as to why this is the case. There's a great deal of speculation and rumor, but nothing concrete. In 1869, Andrew Johnson opted, instead of going to the inauguration, to hold a cabinet meeting. And effectively, he was just going to continue running the country all the way up to the moment that Ulysses S. Grant became president. And finally, the last president, when March the 4th was Inauguration Day, was Woodrow Wilson in 1921. Now, in his case, he had actually a very legitimate reason. His health was in decline. In fact, he was even dying. And so it did not make sense for him to go to an inauguration just because, lo and behold, people would see how bad he really was. But Inauguration Day has also been a day where new things seem to always happen and precedents begin. For instance, in 1801, as John Adams was leaving town, Thomas Jefferson would give his inaugural address, and a copy of it would be printed as a special issue of the National Intelligencer. In 1845, James K. Polk's inauguration was covered by the Telegraph and had the very first newspaper illustration showing people what the Inauguration Day celebration looked like. In 1857, James Buchanan would have his inauguration photographed for the very first time. And 40 years later, William McKinley's was the first inauguration ever to be put on film. In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt would have telephones installed so that news of the inauguration could be spread across the country as quickly as possible. In 1925, Calvin Coolidge would have his inauguration broadcasted across the country over the radio. And in 1929, Herbert Hoover would be recorded by a talking newsreel giving the oath of office, allowing people to see and hear the inauguration simultaneously for the first time ever. But by 1933, it was proven that the president could certainly get to D.C. in time fast enough that they didn't need 5 months. And so with the shortened time period from when a person gets elected to being inaugurated, this would require the change. And so since 1933, we have seen January 20th take over the role of Inauguration Day. But it is a rather unique experience, and if you've never been to an inauguration before, we recommend you actually do it, because it is an amazing experience and it only happens every 4 years. You never know when you might find yourself fortunate enough to be in a position where you could be very close and seeing the President of the United States drive by or even walk by. And as such, we highly recommend you take advantage of that opportunity. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.